Progressives in this era also recognized many of the problems that existed in factories and other workplaces that had become quite dangerous. Say, for example, you work at a factory and you hurt yourself. Okay? If you're out of work and you can't work, you're not going to have a wage and you're going to be in trouble. Okay? The advent and idea of workers' compensation came out from around this time. When I used to work for SMU about a number of years ago, I think it was 2010, I slammed my pinky finger in between two moving walls. One of them came out of joint, popped out of place, and my finger was caught in between and smashed and broke my finger and split it up. And I don't know how I didn't lose my nail, but problems came from that. Okay. Um, I actually had a workers' comp claim because I missed a couple of days, so I had to get it all stitched up. I broke my bone. It was a nasty ordeal. Okay, so instead of having to take personal days, workers' comp actually paid for that. That's a pretty minor injury in comparison to some other things that go on in factories. You could be working at a chicken factory, and you hang the chicken on the thing, and what if you hang it incorrectly and it takes your thumb off, or something like that? Yeah, that's going to be an issue. Or you work in a butcher shop and oops, you slip and you cut your fingers off. That sounds awful, but that's a reality in a lot of factories and other places where you have a lot of machinery and other equipment. And so the idea of workers' comp comes out around this time. Worker safety, compensation, and improvement of processes to make them safer, along with safer equipment, also comes out around this time. And you have various different labor movements that also put into play child labor laws. Remember, we talked a little bit ago about how children would oftentimes, 7 years old, be put to work in a factory. I've got a 7-year-old son. I cannot imagine what that would be like for my son to work in a factory from sun up to sundown. So there had to be various different laws um, that put a limit on how children can work. And now the working age is 15 or 16, one of those. And a certain amount of hours too. And then also working rights for women too, that would challenge the idea and improve social reform for how women worked in the workplace and otherwise. Now, political unions would also help in this particular case, like Tammany Hall, which was kind of like it's a city machine, a boss-led city political machine that in this case incorporated a progressive idea to make workplaces safer. And what really got Tammany Hall started up was a fire at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. Um, Triangle Shirtwaist was a modestly tall building in New York that produced clothing equipment. And the factory there in 1911 caught fire. And it killed about 146 people because it was a multi-story building. There weren't really any secure exits. There was no such thing as a fire escape. There wasn't anything like a sprinkler system or anything else along those lines. So the fire at Triangle Shirtwaist really got progressives moved towards the idea of safer workplaces. We are now going to move towards having buildings that have various different codes with easier access. There'd be a study done over the course of the next few years that would make all buildings have certain codes for escape, exits. If you leave like any sort of public building, you see like where there's that red exit sign everywhere you go. If there's like a fire alarm, you probably had them at school. You hear the sirens go off, you see the flashing lights, and you also, sometimes if there's an actual fire, many buildings are equipped with like a sprinkler system in the ceiling, and it'll automatically pop off. Okay? There are some buildings that are designed to suck out the air. So like in a library, for example, if you dump a bunch of water on books, you're going to ruin everything. So, to end a fire, one of the things you can do is vacuum seal the room. Fire needs oxygen for fuel. Well, if it doesn't have any oxygen, it's going to die out. Okay? So that's one of the theories. So some of the buildings have those as well. Nonetheless, though, it is around this time that labor laws, progressive reform, help children, workers' compensation, women, and then work safety in and involved around equipment and buildings themselves, especially for like fire escapes. Progressives in the era thought of a lot of things. They weren't thinking about African Americans, though. Okay? Still, the African American population around this time was still quite small and oft ignored. Okay? So, there were racial norms that black people really had to fight through, and to this day, we're still fighting those. Things have gotten significantly better. We're still a ways. Okay? But it was around this time that you had prominent black progressives that really started to challenge racial and societal norms, particularly unto black people. And one of the most noted black leaders around this time was Booker T. Washington, an educator. Booker T. Washington became president of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. You might have heard of Tuskegee Institute because of the movie Red Tails, where you have a number of African American fighter pilots that served in World War II. Those were the Tuskegee Airmen who were from the Tuskegee Institute. That's Booker T. Washington's institute. Okay? The Tuskegee Institute originally was a school that was called a normal school, which meant it would educate teachers. Okay? So you're basically teaching teachers how to teach. Okay? But then also various different trades and skills could be learned there. And Booker T. Washington's philosophy, especially at the Atlanta Compromise, was if black people could educate ourselves and learn a skill, not only could we not have to rely on white people, we could provide for ourselves, and eventually, as we are productive, we will eventually integrate into white society and vice versa. Okay? He recognized as what he thought would be a slow acceptance. Something like overnight ripping the Band-Aid off wouldn't quite work in his eyes. So he thought, hey, why rely on them? Why don't we befriend the white folks who are on our cause and slowly implement change by demonstrating that we are capable of learning, creating trades, and learning and working for ourselves and producing for ourselves. We could also teach those that work in the agricultural fields how to improve their agricultural output without relying on the white guy. Okay? That was his belief, in that black people could integrate into society by being self-reliant, but it wouldn't happen overnight. His philosophy was challenged by another great black leader at the time, W.E.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois' Niagara movement challenged Booker T. Washington. Du Bois' belief was that, why wait? Why do we have to work with the few white people who are willing to help us? Why do we have to accept certain different educational roles? Why can't we have freedom, equality now? And he really challenged a lot of those societal norms. And he challenged Booker T. Washington in saying, you're capitulating and promoting the idea of racial segregation. You seem to be okay with it. That's not okay. Booker T. Washington's response to that criticism was, look, I know what this is, but black people are only a very small percentage of this country's population. We have the odds highly stacked against us. We have to slowly integrate, because if you threaten white people now, you're going to see probably worse backlash than what we already have. You have dueling ideologies at the time. Both had their place, both had their credence. But W.E.B. Du Bois would be one of the founders of the modern NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, along with white progressives who wanted to see an improvement for black people's situations. W.B. Du Bois and other influential black folks started that movement so as to gain real equality. Okay, a true civil rights movement really began with W.B. Du Bois' belief and ideology that challenged Booker T. Washington. They were both right in many different ways. Okay, Booker T. Washington was right in saying, "Hey, look, white society is not ready for this yet." And as wrong as that is, we don't want any sort of backlash to be worse than a potential hope that we have. I'm with you, but I don't know if white society is there yet. So you have challenging beliefs in and thereof. But then also, you would have Ida B. Wells, who was another influential black leader, this time a female black leader, who began various different church movements that advented the exposure of lynchings and segregation, challenging segregation. She saw that an alarming number of black men were being lynched in the South for not that right a cause either. Okay, so she challenged, especially at personal risk, because the Ku Klux Klan would be looking for somebody who wants to challenge lynchings. She challenged the idea of lynchings and exposure. Okay, that's courage. Okay, that's Ida B. Wells, W.B. Du Bois' Niagara Movement, Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise.